How to lose a war? This question has not been answered so far because all military experts have offered suggestions on how to win a war. The war success of many leaders in history is one of the best examples of this. But Putin is trying to teach the whole world how to lose a war. Putin's army makes a new mistake every day. The last mistake was perhaps one of the biggest events of this war. Russia shot Turkey's ship. The ship burst into flames. A Turkish merchant ship named Tuzla was anchored in the port of Kherson. The ship was hit by Russian missiles. A huge fire broke out due to the shells hitting the ship. No crew members were on board at the time. This incident could completely change the course of the war because Turkey is a NATO member. Russia attacked a NATO member for the first time in this war. This could result in Turkey and other NATO members attacking Russia. To understand this situation, let's take a look at Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them an exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with the other parties, such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. The last time Russia had tensions with a NATO country was when a missile was accidentally shut down in Poland. NATO countries immediately convened and held a meeting on what could be done to attack Russia. It was later revealed that the missile had been accidentally fired by Ukraine. But this time there is no doubt that the ship was shot down by Russia. The whole world is waiting for what the Turkish government will do about it. If Turkey declares war on Russia, all NATO members will have to support Turkey in this war. This could spell the end of the Kremlin. This event has also varied commentators in Russia. It is learnt that Russian ministers are meeting urgently to discuss how to manage this crisis. Russia may say that it shot this ship by mistake, but no matter what happens, this incident will cause a huge damage to Russia. Turkey is a strategically very important country. All the peace talks between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations are taking place in Turkey. Turkish President Erdogan is making great efforts to bring this war to an end as soon as possible. Even when NATO members imposed sanctions on Russia, the Turkish government did not impose sanctions on Russia in order to organize the peace talks. However, it is well known that Turkey is still firmly tied to NATO. This spoils all Russia's plans. The Russian army wants to bring its navy to the Black Sea so that it can use the seas to invade Ukraine. But as you know, all the routes to the Black Sea are controlled by the Turkish government. This gives Turkey a lot of power over Russia. Turkey knows very well that it cannot win in Ukraine without using the Black Sea. On the other hand, the Bayraktar drones sent by Turkey to Ukraine are disrupting all the plans of the Russian army. That's why the Russian government is trying to create tension between Turkey and NATO. In an interview with Anchor Daily News before the attack, Professor Dr. Zeki Parlak, one of the leading academics in his field in Turkey, stated Turkey's position in the war as follows. Turkey's position is extremely important, and I think the right policy Turkey follows. If Turkey actually allied with the West with Ukraine, then would disturb Russia. But now Turkey is selling weaponry, selling things to both sides, to Ukraine and as well as the Russians. So therefore, actually following such a balance is definitely in favor of the Turkey. And it was actually, as a matter of fact, is the best solution or best policy. Finally, Sweden's recent accession to NATO carried the possibility of a conflict between Turkey and NATO. Russia wanted to use this as an opportunity, but the cooperation between NATO and Turkey has remained strong. Putin's government made a bizarre move to disrupt this cooperation. Putin, who burned the Quran, the holy book of Muslims, in front of the Turkish embassy in Sweden, was financially supported by Russia for years after the burning of the Quran in front of the Turkish embassy. The Turkish people were outraged and many protests were organized. But the Turks were angry with Putin himself, not the Swedish government. Tensions between Turkey and Sweden soonest. Russia once again failed to get Turkey on its side. However, the Russian plan to attack the Turkish ship is not yet known. There are only guesses about it. The most popular guess is this: Russia has declared war on Turkey by shooting down the Turkish ship. Turkey will want to attack Russia with NATO's support, but NATO members will disagree on this. This will be the beginning of a process that will tear Turkey away from NATO. NATO members can disrupt this Russian plan by continuing to support Turkey. It is also expected that Turkey will send much more support to Ukraine after this operation. Most citizens in Turkey hate Putin and support Ukraine. This Russian aggression will increase the anger against Putin even more in Turkey. Turkey is expected to send a large number of Bayraktar drones to Ukraine. Turkey's steps will determine the future of Ukraine. The Russian army does not have enough forces and preparations for an operation launched by Turkey. The Kremlin administration fears that Turkey will launch an operation against Russia. The Ukrainian government continues to show solidarity with Turkey. Ukrainian President Zelensky has been warning about this issue since the beginning of the war. Zelensky claimed that if Russia was not stopped in Ukraine, Putin would definitely attack a NATO member. The Ukrainian leader was right once again. Western countries will use their last chance to stop Putin. This Russian attack is an important opportunity to mobilize NATO. Ukrainian leader Zelensky is expected to make statements and call for NATO countries to take action on this issue. All of Zelensky's statements affect NATO members. Zelensky is a very successful speaker and negotiator in the agreements made so far. Zelensky has managed to get everything he wanted. He can mobilize NATO with his statements on this issue, and NATO military operation against Russia would completely change the history of the world. Detailed maps of Moscow and plans for an operation against the Kremlin have long been kept in NATO's military departments. If NATO decides to launch such an operation, this war could be over in a very short time. It remains to be seen what policy NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg will adopt. However, it is known that many NATO members have been increasing their military strength and preparing for a possible war for a long time. It is thought that NATO member states may take bold decisions for this operation. Nevertheless, NATO is making efforts to end the war as soon as possible. That's why some states think that it is only necessary to send more support to Ukraine, but that the NATO militaries should not intervene in the war. It is not yet known what NATO will decide. How do you think the tensions between Turkey and Russia will affect this war? What policy do you think the Turkish government should pursue against Russia? Do you think NATO will launch an operation against Russia? What do you think Zelensky should do in this regard? While the Ukrainian armed forces are marching towards the Crimea with the attack they started in Kherson, Putin is brooding in the Kherson region in the south of Ukraine. Conflicts are escalating after the Ukrainian armed forces carried out an all-out attack on the region. The Russian army is trying to protect its 3-month settlement in the region, while the Ukrainian Turkish-made Bayraktar B-2 guides the Ukrainian armed forces. The US-made M777 howitzers pave the way in collaboration with the TB-2 and crush the Russian positions and detachments in Kherson. The Ukrainian armed forces legendarily resisted the fierce attacks of the world's second-largest army for months. Russia had to withdraw from the north and northeast Ukraine 2 months ago, and the Ukrainian army took this opportunity and launched an all-out attack on the north, the northeast, and even the east, recently completely liberating the north and the northeast from occupation with a very strong belief in a good strategy. The Ukrainian armed forces expected the Russian army to make mistakes and analyze the morale of the Russian army consistently with the loss of Mariupol. All of southern Ukraine, with the exception of Odessa, came under Russian control. However, the Ukrainian army had to disrupt Russia's plans and especially liberate the southern cities. Errors in strategy in the Russian army, heavy losses in the Russian troops, and very low morale in the army Even Putin's dismissal of high-ranking generals and the irregular payment of the salaries of the Russian army. All these elements symbolize the success of the Ukrainian armed forces, while at the same time it was a great opportunity for them. Now, the Ukrainian armed forces had the opportunity to liberate Kherson in the heart of the south from Russian occupation. After 100 days, the Ukrainian armed forces took advantage of the great breach opened in the Russian army and started an all-out attack based in Kherson in the south. The crack and strategic mistake in the Russian army was the offensive operation in the Donbass and Severodonetsk region. The Russian army, which started a large-scale invasion in Severodonetsk, had to withdraw some of its troops from Kherson and its surroundings. Kherson, which establishes the connection between Mykolaiv and Odessa regions in Crimea, has a critical importance for both the Russian army and the Ukrainian armed forces. Kherson, the first major region captured by the Russians since the day of the invasion, has been in Russian hands for over 90 days. In the latest reports, it was stated that the Ukrainian armed forces liberated more than 20 settlements on the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region in the Kherson region. Henadai Laheda, head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration, stated during the nationwide telephone conversation that more than 20 densely populated areas bordering the Dnipropetrovsk region were cleared of the Russian army. It was stated that the Ukrainian armed forces continued the operation and continued to advance. To put this in simpler terms, the Ukrainian armed forces liberated almost all the areas north of the Dnipro River, passing through the middle of the Kherson region. And by strengthening the defense lines there, they advanced at full speed to the center of Kherson on the road to Crimea. In fact, the Ukrainian army does not give up defense in attack in Severodonetsk, 70% of which is under the control of the Russian army. According to the latest reports, the Russian army failed to capture Severodonetsk and the Ukrainian armed forces are still fighting, and at least 2 settlements have been retaken and the Russians repelled. When we look at the situation in Kherson, again, the Russian army is trying to continue its resistance in the region to stop the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russian army blew up bridges in the region near Davidov Bridge and Veliko Alexandrivka in Hulits River. The advance of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kherson region poses a major problem for Russian President Vladimir. Kherson is in a critical position for the control of the southern part of Ukraine and is the junction point of Ukraine with Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014, with the recapture of the region by Ukraine. The advance of the Ukrainian armed forces towards the Crimea may also take place. This possibility infuriates Putin because the Sevastopol port of Crimea is currently the most important port in the Black Sea for the Russian Navy. The loss of this port could mean Russia's complete loss of the Black Sea. At the same time, while Russian troops are withdrawing from parts of the region, it has been announced that the small advances made by the Russian army recently with new medium-range missile systems from the United Kingdom and the United States are reversible. M777 howitzers are leading the Ukrainian operation in the Kherson region, together with Bayraktar DB-2. Russian targets determined by Bayraktar DB-2 unmanned aerial vehicles from long distances are shattered by M777 howitzers sent by the USA. Since the day it was shipped to Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces began to chase the Russian army in many regions. We all remember the attack that targeted the bridge over the Severodonetsk River in the Donbass region, and 3 battalions of Russian tanks were destroyed in the area. Artillery brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces, mostly using US M777 howitzers, destroyed the Russian tactical group of 3 tank battalions in the Severodonetsk River in just 10 days. This colossal loss was perhaps Russia's heaviest land defeat in history. A similar situation is likely to occur in Kherson. This effect is also evident in the Kherson region, and the Ukrainian armed forces are destroying the Russian targets they can identify much more easily than long distances one by one with howitzers. The long presence and establishment of the Russian army in the region makes them a much more open target for howitzer attacks. Kherson also has the Dnipro River and the Inhulets River. The Ukrainian armed forces will not rush to retake these areas and will wait for the right time. On the other hand, the Russian army and Vladimir Putin cannot afford the loss of Kherson, and this will force the Russian army to make mistakes. In this case, a new Severodonetsk River legend may be born. Statements from the USA, on the other hand, state that Russian President Vladimir Putin plans to annex Kherson just like Crimea. U.S. State Department Representative Ned Price stated at a press conference that Russian forces may want to annex the separatist Luhansk and Donetsk regions in Kherson Oblast and Donbass. The Kremlin is probably weighing several approaches from recognizing a so-called People's Republic, as Russia forcibly did in Donetsk and Luhansk, to an attempt at annexation, as Russia did in Crimea, Price said in his statements. At the same time, Price stated that although he has no right to continue his statements, he plans to make the region independent by holding a fake referendum in Kherson, as he did in Crimea in 2014. The probability of this being possible seems very high because it is known that more than 50% of Ukrainians in the Kherson region have left the region. Russia may see the right to carry out this operation, which it implemented and succeeded in Crimea here as well. If Russia retains control of the region, the referendum could be the Kremlin's way of justifying its annexation of the region. The plan was endorsed by Kirill Stremusov, deputy head of the pro-Kherson military civil administration of Kremlin, who said the process could include a referendum, but not in the fall. Immediately after Russia captured the Kherson region, it completely changed the local administrations in the region and started to implement military junta administration. In fact, according to the statements of some local residents who left the region, it is stated that Russia has started its assimilation efforts. Kirill Stremusov, vice president of the pro-Kherson military civil administration, which is pro-Kremlin, stated that they have prepared an administrative system and that they will see how this situation will take shape towards the next year. A lot of news today is coming from the Donetsk region here. The Russians have been pushing along the whole front line, and in some parts, the Ukrainians also conducted a number of counterattacks when it comes to the Avdiivka group. As you remember, the main goal of the Russians here is to take Avdiivka into a pocket by advancing from two directions simultaneously. However, encirclement from the northern part proved to be extremely challenging for the Russians for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the Russians have to cross the road that is located on the embankment. Secondly, after crossing the embankment, they immediately fall in the lowlands in front of Krasnohorivka. And thirdly, the Ukrainians control an artificial mountain terracone. So because the Russians here are at a significant tactical disadvantage, they seem to have stopped assaulting Krasnohorivka altogether. But the same cannot be said for the area to the south of Avdiivka because here the Russians continue to push every day. The Ukrainians are also very active and counterattack the Russians whenever there is an opportunity to do so. Firstly, the Ukrainians conducted a counterattack on Opiton, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. As of now, they are controlling a powerful checkpoint to the north of the settlement. While the Russians controlled the settlement itself, the Russians tried to assault this checkpoint from Opiton in the past, but their attempts were unsuccessful. It seems like both parties struggled to push each other out, so we may not see rapid changes in this region very soon. That is why the Russians seem to have switched to defense mode here while waiting for the Russians in Virginia to attack this checkpoint from the back. And the Russians in Virginia seem to maintain a high intensity of attacks. According to Russian sources, they successfully took the northern part of the village, but this is the third time they claim control over it, with no indication that this is the case. According to Ukrainian sources, their attacks were repelled, and judging by the action of the Ukrainians, it seems like the Russians may lose the initiative today. The Ukrainians have attacked the Russian rear positions near Pisky in order to undermine Russian positions in Virginia. Their main idea here is to block Russian reinforcements. It is highly unlikely that the Ukrainians want to maintain their positions here for a long time because the Russian counterattack is imminent. That is why this operation should have been conducted to achieve short-term goals. And the fact that the Ukrainians are trained to limit Russian supplies and support of Virginia in the short term means that the Ukrainians are preparing a counterattack to free Virginia completely. In the meantime, the Russians are moving in the direction of Nevelsky. Recently, Ukrainian sources confirmed that the Russians made marginal progress here and took control over certain checkpoints. Nonetheless, there are attempts to move further. Cost them a lot as they basically have to storm the fields with infantry that finds itself at a crossfire. Some say that the main idea behind taking over Alaska is to cut supply to Krasnohorivka. At first glance, it seems like a good idea because given that the southern roads are too close to the front line and cannot be used, this should be their main supply route. This means that if the Russians cut this main road from the north, then the Ukrainians in Krasnohorivka should be in the operational encirclement or simply trapped. However, this is not true. If we look closer, we can see that there are many other roads that lead to Krasnohorivka from a lot of different settlements. It is true that these roads are paved, but given that the temperature is below zero and that the Ukrainians need to travel only a few kilometers, it is obvious that the Russians aren't even close to endangering this supply and support of this group. Even if the Russians take Nevelsky and establish fire control over the northern paved road, overall, the situation on the Avdiivka-Krasnohorivka segment of the front is quite stable and there is no imminent threat to the Ukrainian positions.